I taped for over an hour yesterday with Bill Simmons in house, and I didn't know how much would be left on the Kyrie thing because eventually I was going to be like, okay, well, there's my open. Friday, he demands a trade. Sunday, he's actually traded. So I was like, there's your open, stupid. And then Bill and I in house did an hour plus. But the thing is after we taped, a lot more information came out about the trade market, who was involved, the parameters on different deals from all these different teams. So I think there is enough to at least talk about it again. All right, so the first question you have is why for Dallas? We're hearing a lot of the same very predictable things, is that he loves Jason Kidd, okay? Nico Harrison, who was with Nike, who's running the basketball ops side of it, that there's a great relationship there, and that Luka signed off on this, and that Cuban signed off on it. And then, of course, this is an actual quote where they referenced that they have a different culture than the Nets. Okay. He also said that he's ecstatic. He said that about going to Boston as well. Here's my question to all that. Maybe it's all true. Maybe it is a different culture that's somehow better. I don't know. But if he couldn't buy in with Durant, if he didn't feel like he owed Durant just something, at least for the end of this stretch. I mean, you realize they were like, right before Durant got hurt again, they were 18-2. Like Durant was going to start for the All-Star East. I don't know who would have been left out with all of that. He was going to, be in the MVP conversation. I mean, unfortunately, predictably, Durant got hurt again, but they had kind of figured it out. They weren't overwhelming favorites, but it started to feel like maybe Brooklyn can be good enough to come out of a packed East, the top of the East at least stacked, right? So if Kyrie didn't have some element of like, this is a guy that we set out on this plan to try to figure out, 4 years ago, if he didn't feel some level of like, hey, I owe Durant something, can anybody feel like because of some relationship, minor or major one, because a lot of these are passing, right? Like, oh yeah, he loves Jason Kidd. Yeah, how long have you guys hung out? Oh, never? Okay. Got it. Then if he's willing to move on from Durant this quickly, and again, the report on Friday was that there was a principal issue. I think it was very clear that Kyrie was upset that the contract offer, which by the way, the contract offer was stacked. They just wanted to, play in fucking basketball games. I know, that's just a crazy thought. And Kyrie didn't want to do it, so he didn't sign it. And then he threatened to opt out and sign the mid-level so that he could go to the Lakers. And then that was weird because on Monday they were saying he was definitely going to do it, and then he didn't do it on Tuesday. I mean, I went back over the timeline of just the net stuff alone, like just going AWOL, not telling anybody where he is, saying that he didn't want to get vaccinated, which is a whole nother dispute through all sorts of people on social media. I'm not even interested in taking either side with that one. And then just like straight up missing, like not telling anybody what was going on. They get Nash fired. Jacques Vaughn saying they allowed me to coach them, which is like the biggest self-own ever. And then just decides again on Friday, as you would think this team would be gearing up for some kind of run. He wasn't interested. He wasn't interested in being a part of it because of his contract situation and his contract situation alone. He can be about all these other things and this enlightened dude that none of us can understand. He's smarter than the rest of us. The guy wanted to make sure he was in a better position to go ahead and get his money. All right. And that's why I thought maybe the next level of drama would be avoided for Kyrie. In a weird way, I was like, man, it's been kind of quiet lately. It's been kind of quiet for a while, and he's playing really well. And now he's going to be an all-star starter. And, maybe he can ride this out, see what happens with the team, and then hits the market, because it's weird how quickly we can forget and how quickly things can change. And now Dallas is saying a lot of the same things that you've heard elsewhere. Like, it'll be different here. It'll be different here. Okay, so let's look in the market. Apparently, the Lakers did offer up the 27 and 29 first-round picks. I haven't heard, whether reading it or anything else, on what was involved with the protection. Because if they're protected, then this is different. Because then it was like, wait, the Lakers actually did make that offer? Well, the problem is if there wasn't a third team, I don't think you could bring Westbrook back and play with Durant. It's the whole reason he ended up leaving in the first place in Oklahoma City. He didn't want to play with him anymore. So I don't know that you can do that to Durant, because then you still have now a Durant issue. Although you'd have to think that even Durant, as faithful as he was to the friendship with Kyrie, even he at this point would be like, okay, if this dude wanted out, like, all right, let me just try to see what happens this season. We've got these other pieces with Dinwiddie, with Dorian Finney-Smith. Durant's not going to care about the draft picks or whatever, but they get the one pick in the 2 seconds. So did the Lakers actually offer up unprotected first in 27 and 29 and Westbrook, or was Westbrook on its own just not enough because they couldn't find the third team to facilitate that too because they didn't want Westbrook back with Durant? I know there was also reports that they wanted Max Christie and Austin Reeves in this, but I've got to know the protection on those because then I'd be a little surprised if the Lakers just went straight up unprotected. And I thought we had a ton of information in a very short amount of time about what everybody else's offers were, which I think for the Lakers, it may have been motivated to like, let's make sure we get this out there so LeBron and the players, because apparently the divide was the players wanted to trade for Kyrie, LeBron specifically, and the front office didn't actually want to do that, which I can understand not wanting to give up unprotected in 27, 29 for a guy that doesn't guarantee you anything. As well as Kyrie has played, we're just going through this again. I don't think that's a great bet to make that kind of investment with. And if you're the Lakers too, you're one of the few franchises that probably wants to keep some of these picks after getting ready so many in the New Orleans deal for AD, because that next guy that's upset, that's a major player that decides he wants to follow in the LeBron void and be the marquee for the Lakers in the next half of this decade, you may go like, why do we get rid of our picks for somebody that's a bad bet? But however, LeBron tweeted out, maybe it's me, which the translation is, it's definitely not me, because he wanted everybody to know that. But he's been doing this a bit more where he's trying to separate himself from the influence of the front office. He was asked about Kyrie on Saturday, and part of the quote was, I don't speak for the front office. I think a lot of that has to do with the Westbrook trade, to be honest with you. So then Phoenix apparently was interested. They offered Chris Paul, which if you look at the contract, after this year, it's $60 million, 30 and 30, but only $15 million of it's guaranteed for the following season, not this season. And then that has to be decided on in June of this year, June of 23. And then the next $30 million for the fourth year of that deal is June of 24. So it was like it was 4 years, 120, which was a lot more than people thought that Sarver would go with Paul. But the back years weren't guaranteed. The problem is if you're trading for Chris Paul, even if you think he's declining a bit, you have to figure at least guaranteeing the first of those 2 years, right? And then it's Jay Crowder, but then it was only one pick. And the conversation apparently was they wanted the 3 picks from Phoenix. I don't care what you think of Kyrie at this point. Like he's not a 3 unprotected first guy. He just isn't. So Phoenix apparently was out very quickly after making that offer. Apparently the Clippers were in on this. Luke Kennard's deal and Terrence Mann. I've liked Terrence Mann at times. You're not trading Norman Powell at all. I'd rather have Norman Powell just straight up than Kyrie. I know he's not as good of a player, but it's just way less of a hassle. I guess a first and 2 swaps from the Clippers, but that wasn't enough. Now, the other element of the story that made it public of why the Lakers deal with the unprotections may not have happened anyway and didn't have as much to do with Westbrook is that Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, was like, look, I don't want him to go to LA. Now, there were different descriptions of how this did or didn't go down. I had read straight up, he didn't want it to happen. There was also other people who reported he preferred not to send him to the Lakers. I'd have to think, as upset as you could be at Kyrie, and I think there's no one more justified in being annoyed with a basketball player than Joe Tsai, I'd have to imagine that you wouldn't be so spiteful that you would cost your franchise an extra asset just because you wanted to send him to Dallas instead of the Lakers. I'm sure it was part of it. If it was a cherry on top type of thing, fine, but I still would have to know what the protections were. And again, I just thought this was really interesting that all of us had this information hours after the trade actually happened, which is kind of strange that it was that thorough. So back to the Mavericks. A lot of the Mavs fans, I know what you're doing. Every other fan base has done it too, is you're just going to lie to yourself and be like, this is going to be awesome. Maybe it will be for a little while, right? I mean, that's the whole point. So the reason we had all these teams even trying is that the guy is still really good. Maybe they owed it to Luka, promised Luka something. I don't know the perfect fit with Luka. Like sometimes when I watch them, I go, it's clear there's a massive talent drop off and he needs that next guy. And Brunson was really good in the minutes where Luka wasn't in there, but was also good of creating off of Luka, which is also kind of what you need in today's game. Christian Wood, I'm not necessarily a huge fan, but then at other times it's like these long shooting options, guys that can switch defensively. So maybe that was like, maybe they actually were creating the best 4 around Luka for what you needed with him. But then you'd be like, okay, well, how talented are they? Their big turnaround last year was their defense just became incredible in like the second half of the season. This year, it's not been the same. Probably a couple different reasons for that one. So when you look at Luka, you're like, okay, well, you got to do something for him. You got to add something else. And I guess that's what they just tried to do here. But I wouldn't ever do it with Kyrie. Now, I've also heard, well, worst case scenario is it doesn't work out and he just walks. Now, granted, they could do a 2-year extension of around $80 million. Kyrie actually gets a $2 million trade kicker in all this. Like, there should be some rule against that. Like, oh, and you get a $2 million bonus, as if that's written into the contract if the team trades you. Like, well, if you trade me, you got to do a 15% kicker. And it's like, what if you are just a massive distraction for every month you're with the organization and you want out multiple times and we still have to trade you or give you that trade bonus? Yep, that's what happened there. Now, a player can turn that down if he wants, but I don't think he's going to with that one. So, because Anthony Davis did after reports that he wasn't going to, which was weird that he just magically let $4.5 million go away. So, there was a thought here with Dallas when, again, Mavs fans are going to talk themselves into this. This is not new here, where it's like, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, and I don't know what doesn't work out means, just losing basketball games and not advancing in the West, that would be like the best case scenario of this not working out because he's just a bad bet. It's a bad bet. It's a bad partnership. I mean, maybe he keeps his shit together for the next 30 plus games because he wants a 4-year max contract. Now, again, he can do a 2-year extension with Dallas now, or you do 4 years this summer. But if he walks, then I've seen because of the Finney-Smith trade and because of Dinwiddie that they have max slot space, right? Max salary cap space. Dallas, you've done this before. And here's the weird thing. Dallas has whiffed historically in the past, whether it was Darren Williams or Dwight Howard, or we had 8 years ago a DeAndre Jordan hostage situation. I was going back and reading this stuff this morning. It was like one guy described DeAndre Jordan as like setting the franchise back years. That ended up being one of those deals you're like, thank God we didn't get him that year because when it went south for him, it went south pretty quickly towards the end of that contract. So Dallas, who you would think would actually always be a really good free agent destination for a bunch of different reasons, no state taxes. Remember Cuban, who used to be like the guy who was like, I want the visitors' locker room to be awesome. He was putting Xboxes in each and every locker for the visiting guys because he wanted to use it as a recruiting tool to show you how much basketball mattered to the organization. And none of that shit ever worked. Like, they actually have a really bad track record with cap space. Because I don't know why, because cap space is the most overrated asset that everybody talks about in the NBA. I used to believe in it all the time. I'd look at every single contract and be like, oh, they made this trade, and now they're going to have all this cap space. And cap space is stupid because you don't know who's going to take it. And for most of the teams that have it and hoard it, they end up not getting to use it on the guys that they're actually targeting. And Dallas, for whatever reason, I don't look at Dallas as like 20 to 15 other franchises where it's like you can have all the cap space you want. Nobody's going to go there. Dallas, you would think, would be a destination. It's not a great free agent class. Maybe you could do some other flexible stuff, but that's not how you should be doing the math on this. When you give up a pick and you give up 2 good rotation players, where it's like, well, if he walks, we have cap space. The weirdest thing out of this whole deal is what if they like go to the Western Conference Finals and Kyrie's terrific and there's no issues enough where then you have a front office going, it is us. Because that way you're like, we figured it out. We're the guys. The worst case could actually be that it goes really well this year and you give him 4 years because then it's not going to be smooth sailing the next 4 years. I will bet any amount of any fucking money with anybody that's not going to be smooth sailing for 4 years because he's incapable of it. But again, we just had what? The Mavs, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Suns, and that's just what we know of in the matter of a couple days. There's clearly more teams that were in on this that we don't know about. There's plenty of stuff I know I don't know. And so I'm sitting here going, I can't believe there'd be a market for him, and yet there's like a handful of teams that wanted this guy immediately. So maybe I'm wrong.